Hey everyone, Mimsy here. I'm going to do a tutorial today on how to replace the leather on this dining room chair seat. This is a job for a client of mine, and they have 8 of these chairs that are all coming apart here. So this is a box chair seat. This piece right here is called the boxing. As you can see, it's got double welt. There's welt on the bottom and there's welt on the top. So this one is a little bit more complicated than just a regular wraparound dining chair. So it takes, I'll be given a ton of upholstery tips on this one. There's a lot of little things that are, a lot of little tips in this video that will give you a really professional look. You could certainly do this on your own, but I have a ton of little tips in here that's going to make it look really good. It's a little bit more complicated. It does require a sewing machine because this welt is sewn in, this top welt is sewn in. But if you have a sewing machine, a decent sewing machine, and just a little bit of skills, you can do this. So let's get started. Okay, so the first step of this project is to gather your supplies. You're gonna need an awl is very helpful for taking out some staples, a flathead screwdriver, pliers, scissors obviously, a measuring utensil, some chalk is good, and then of course you need your leather, or faux leather in this case, but it looks like leather. So that's it. And then the first step to this is to take off the old fabric, and you want to do that fairly carefully because you want to keep it intact in order to utilize that old fabric as your pattern. So the bottom of your chair seat, probably this one has cardboard. A lot of times it'll have that thin, cheap, black fabric-y stuff that's called cambric. So take that off. I'm going to reuse this, so I'm trying to be fairly careful here so that I can put this back on when I get the new leather on. So I'm just prying it up. So there we go. Now you can see the staples around the bottom. And the easiest way to do this is to get your pliers up underneath there, not your pliers, your flathead screwdriver. That's what I'm working with, just an old flathead screwdriver. Get that up underneath here and just pry it up all the way around. No reason to take every single one of these staples out. You could, if you're a perfectionist, you could do that, but you're going to be going right over the top of these again, so there's not really any reason to do that. If one of them comes up and is sticking out, then obviously take your pliers and pull that one out. So far mine are all, that one's out a little bit, so I will grab a hold of that one and take this one out. It's not a, and but anyway, and if they are sticking up a little bit, if they're not flat in, you can just take your hammer and bang them in flat. So that way you can just staple right over the top of them. So that's how we do this. Just take them out all the way around. All right, so I've got all the staples pulled. So this is loose. Now I'm gonna just unfold this from the cushion. So now I am going to take my seam ripper and rip this seam out so that I have the boxing piece separated from the top piece, because I want my top piece separate so I can use the top piece as a pattern. So let me find my seam ripper, which is probably on the floor somewhere because they always roll off the table. And I can't find my seam ripper, so I'm going to use my little scissors that I keep next to my sewing machine and just clip away some of the stitches here in order to get this started, and then I will attempt to just rip this apart without ripping the leather, because like I said, I want to keep it intact so I can use it as a pattern. So it's coming apart. It's coming apart just by ripping it, but obviously it's going to be destroyed. So okay, so now I've got this top piece out, and I can use this as a pattern. So what I'll do is I'll lay this down on top of my leather and trace it and cut around it. But the way I like to do that is I like to actually fold it in half so that I know for sure that my two sides are symmetrical. And I mean, this was obviously probably symmetrical when they cut it originally, but over time, from sitting on it and just time, this could have gotten a little bit off square. So I'll just fold it in half, and I will lay this on my fabric and trace around it. See, it's not even quite symmetrical here, but I do know that the previous upholsterer did cut a notch in the center. I don't know if you can see that notch there in the center. They did that on the top or in the front and also in the back. So I know I can fold this straight in half by folding that right on the V there and right on that V there, and I know that I've got this right in half, even though these don't line up, and that's probably because it's stretched over time. But so that's how I'm going to do that. I'm going to now clean up my area and cut my fabric. One more thing. If you have a chair seat that the foam is really worn out and you need to cut new foam for your seat, you always want to cut your foam slightly bigger than your wood platform, so that it'll kind of curve around that wood platform. So you see how this one is slightly bigger on all sides, all the way around. That foam is a little bit bigger than the wood. That's how ideally you want to cut your foam. So just in case you need to replace your foam, this foam is very firm and in very good condition. So I don't need to do that, but I just wanted to mention that as one of the pro tips is if you're cutting foam for a chair, always cut it a little bit bigger than your wood platform. Okay, so I've got my leather laid out here, and I've got my original seat that's pulled apart here, and it's folded in half. And of course I have my new leather folded in half too. So they're both on both pieces are on the fold, and I'm just going to trace around it. And I do this because I want both sides to be symmetrical. Over time, that fabric can stretch on those seats, and it may get out of square, out of symmetry. So that's why I fold it in half like this. Okay. Now I'll cut it. And while I have it here folded in half, I'm going to go ahead and notch out my back and my front center. So you just do a little V-snip. I'll do this one up close so you can see what I'm talking about. So you just take the corner and just do a tiny little snip there, and see, that leaves you that little V-notch there, so you know this is the front, this is the center of the front, and then of course the center of the back. And when you go to put this on your cushion and staple it down, you just want to make sure that you line that up with the center on the front and the back. So that's that. Now the next step is to go ahead and attach we're gonna attach the welt, which I've already made, and I have a video, I'll link to that. I have a video on how to make welt, and I'll link to it below. So this is the next step, and this, if you have a home sewing machine, I would recommend going ahead and pinning this welt to the platform. If you have a sewing machine with a walking foot, no need to pin. Just go ahead and sew it, it'll be fine. So I'm gonna go ahead and pin this all the way around and then take it to the sewing machine. Okay, one other thing. When you're going around and pinning this or sewing this on, you have to notch this out. Otherwise it's not gonna curve. Not notch it out, but just do some slits. I forget the name of this, but anyway, you've got to cut some slits in here in order for it to get around the curve. Otherwise, it doesn't curve with the back of this cushion. So cut those slits out. See how nicely that curves around now? I still need to do probably a couple more here. But don't forget to do that. It'll make things a lot easier. Okay, here's a little pro tip when you're sewing welt for cushions. If you don't have a walking foot on your sewing machine, then you have to do one of two things. You have to either pin your welt to your cushion top, or you have to sew your cushion top with the welt on the bottom against your feed dog and your cushion top fabric on the top against your presser foot. Otherwise, what happens is your feed dog will pull the fabric. If you do it, okay, so let's say you just lay your welt on top of your fabric and you don't pin, you just lay it down and sew. You would think that would be just fine. The problem is that your feed dog will pull the fabric through at a different rate than the welt goes through the machine. And what'll happen is you'll get puckers in your fabric, or you'll get a wavy look. Your fabric will not be flat. These two things will be sewn together. This will be puckered up and this will be nice and flat. So you have to either pin your welt to your cushion top or feed it through your machine with the welt first, with the welt down and the fabric on top. This will go through at the same rate with your welt on the bottom against the feed dog, your fabric on top against your presser foot. That's the only way to do this if you don't have a walking foot machine. Obviously, if you have a walking foot, don't even worry, lay it down, sew it on, it'll be flat. Because the walking foot pulls it through at the same rate like this. So that's that. The other thing is, there was one other tip I wanted to give you here. Oh, as far as the foot, you do not have to have a welt foot for this. You can, obviously that is helpful, it's nice, but you would have to have a few different size welt foots in order to accommodate different size welts, so I just don't even use it. I use my zipper foot, and I just run it through right next to the welt, and you can see and feel it right there, and I can see and feel that my foot is right up against tight against my welt. So you can do this project. You can make cushions without having any special feet. Your machine will come with a zipper foot. That's all you need for this. So cushions can be done on a home sewing machine. Be way faster and easier with a commercial machine and a walking foot, but you can totally do this on a home sewing machine. That's another pro tip. So let's get going. Okay, so this part I'm going to show you real quick how I approach a corner when I want a real straight right angle. I'll give you a close-up on that. Okay, so when I'm approaching a corner, you want to do the pivot. So you get to the corner, drop your needle in right at the corner, and then lift up your presser foot, spin the piece around, drop the foot back and continue to sew. And I'll show you how that looks. See, that's nice and right angle-ish. I cut inappropriately the first time, but you just clip again, no big deal. But that's how you approach your corners. Okay, so we've gotten to the back of the cushion top, and now I need to join these two together. If this was just fabric, which is obviously thinner than this leather, then what I would do is I would cut out the welt cord, pull it back, cut out that welt cord, and then I would just fold that down and join that over like so, and just sew along there. But because this is so thick, that would just be too much bulk that way. So I am going to actually seam together the ends of the welt. So if I can get this apart, I can't find my seam ripper, so seam rippers are so important. Sheesh, my stitches are tight right here. Oh my gosh. All right, one sec. Okay, so I got my stitches out for a little ways back and a little ways back there. So I am going to sew these two together. And so I'm gonna mark a spot on both of these where I know that they're gonna meet up. So I marked them both. Then I'm gonna open them up, put them together at that seam, or at that mark where I put the chalk, and put a pin in there. Okay, now I am going to squeeze that under my machine and sew across there. I'm gonna reduce the size of my stitch a little bit. Take my pin out. Okay, now I can trim that seam a bit, open that up, see my chalk lines there, and open up that seam so that this will lay in flat. Now I just gotta cut my welt cord a little bit. There we go. Okay, so now I just need to stitch around that. So that way I don't have so much bulk here by overlapping. It looks like, there we go, okay. It's kind of thick here. Okay, so you see how nice and tight that seam is, and that's all sewn on. So I can take my pins out and go on to the next step, which is sewing the boxing piece onto here. So I'll meet you at the table. Okay, so the next step is to cut out the box piece, which is this strip of fabric right here. So I have already done that, but I'm going to show you real quick the easiest way, or the way that I like to do it. So I've got all my fabric here. I like to fold it in half because I can cut easily a width this wide with my ruler. I can't cut 54 inches of fabric straight with my rotary cutter because my ruler is only 48 inches. So I line up my fabric, I make sure that my selvage edges are straight with that black line there. Make sure this is lined up straight with this line here. I use my metal ruler, I mark off 4 inches, and and run my rotary cutter along there. And I have my 4-inch boxing strip, which I've got all cut already. I went ahead and cut my 8 pieces that I need for all my cushions at once, because I like to work assembly line style on these cushions when I've got so many. So there's my boxing pieces, and they're 54 inches, which is not quite enough to get around this whole thing. So I've got to sew 2 of them together. So I'm going to do that and I'll be right back. Okay, so this is the next step. I pinned the boxing to the whole cushion cover, and so then it'll be turned around like that. So I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, sew all the way around right up against the welt, and then we're ready to go ahead and put this on the cushion. Okay, so I have sewn all the way around the perimeter. I've sewn the boxing onto my cushion top, and I just wanted to show you real quick around the corners. So in the corners, I do the same method that I did when I sewed the welt on here, and that is you clip the corner so that you can make that rounded corner. But what I wanted to tell you here is I generally, after I get the whole thing sewn, I'll go back and sew another line of stitches around here just to get nice and tight into the welt, because I'll show you when you turn this over, this one's pretty tight. Like you can see that the welt or the stitching is real close in, and that one's nice and tight. So this one I could probably not put another line of stitch, but this is where a lot of stress happens, so I like to do a second row of stitching there. But if you look at this corner, I did not get in there real tight. You can see how I kind of went around that corner and it came out, and you'll see the results. So this one definitely needs to be restitched. You see how that is kind of pulled away, and you can see the stitching on the welt. So I need to go back in and just stitch closer to that corner. So that's just another little tip there. Go back in and just do your corners once more, get in nice and tight against the welt. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll meet you at the table for actually stapling this on. Okay, so I've got this all sewn. I'm going to turn it now right side out. And the next step is to put this on the cushion. So here's our foam, and here's the platform, the plywood platform. So we're going to go ahead and put that on here. Okay, let's make sure we're all right. So we're gonna go ahead and put a staple in here, and I'm gonna just shoot it in halfway. So what I mean by that is you're gonna hold your staple gun kind of sideways, not sideways, but not flat down like this, and shoot it all the way in. We're gonna hold it like this so that if I need to take this staple back out, it's easy to go ahead and take that staple back out, because I can just grab a hold of it right there. I don't have to try to dig it out with my awl. If I need to take that back out, it's easy to do. So I'm gonna do the same thing on all 4 sides. Because see how already I can see kind of here that I may need to scoot this up, because I had a hard time bringing this around in the front, but around the back there's a lot of fabric there. So I want to make sure we're even on all sides, and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so you see how in the front we've got from the welt to the plywood here. There's my ruler. Okay, so from the welt to the plywood on the front, I've got about 2, hard to see, 2.5. And then on the back, from the welt to the plywood, I've only got 2. So I need to let this out a little bit and pull this down, because we need to have this dimension the same all the way around the cushion. And you can primarily eyeball it, but this first staple needs to be about the same, because when you have this on your chair, it just needs to be the same distance. This is the pro tip here. You want it to be the same distance from here to here. Otherwise, you will notice, I mean, obviously you can see here the stapled and the non-stapled area. You don't want your welt to be wavy in this line. You want it to be straight. So anyhow, so I'll take that out and let that go a bit, and then we're going to staple around. So you see how easy that was for me to pull that out, because I only put it in like that. I'll take this one out and I'll give myself a little more in the front. See, there we go. That's what we needed. Same thing there. I'm still only going to give it a half staple. When I am done, then I'll just hammer that in all the way. So that looks better. Okay, now you always start on the front of your project, stapling on the front of your project, and work your way around to the back on both sides. So I'm going to work my way one way or the other around to the back, then I'll come back to the front and work that way. So this is the way I do it. That's not going to work, so I'm going to have to work this corner a little bit better, and I may have to actually put in a little, I'll have to take this out. Okay, so you see that's not a good corner there. I'm good on this side. I may have to actually put a little batting in there to plump up that corner, because it almost looks like my foam kind of shifted. But I'm going to take that out and kind of rework this corner. So I'm going to put you on fast mode. Okay, so I had to take out a little more staples because there's something that I forgot to tell you. And I'm going to take out these because I forgot to do it. And that is, when you put your cover on, the seam that's here needs to be down. It can't be on the top. So can you kind of see how there's that fabric that's up under there? It can't be on the top because you're going to be able to see that. And the more that these chairs get used, this leather will wear out on where that fabric is. So you've got to bring it to the side. You know what I mean? This piece here. That's got to be on the side. All the way around. It's got to be on the side. Which I didn't even do it on the front. I'm going to have to unstaple this whole thing. because this has to be on the side. And then you staple it. Because you want this top part to be nice and smooth without any of that rippling from the side. So I've got to unstaple this in order to bring that around, so bummer. Okay, so I unstapled the whole thing and I got my sides tucked to the side rather than the top. So now I've got to start over and staple again. So here we go. Okay, so now I've got the cushion all stapled on, and it looks pretty even. So well, not the last step, but close to the last step is putting the welt on the bottom. So I'm going to start it in the back, and you just want to feel underneath the welt to make sure that it is coming off of the edge of the plywood. You don't want it to be too far in, because then when you put this back on the chair you won't see it and it'll be squished. So you just want to make sure you run your fingers underneath it to make sure you're over the edge, and then of course staple that all the way around in order to get the double boxed welt. So you see how that's gonna look? It'll be the double boxed welt all the way around. And so you just staple that here to the underside of the plywood. I'm gonna show you the one that I've already got done just to speed up this process. So once you get that welt stapled all the way around, that's how it'll look. Double box welt. See that? Okay. And then the very last step is to put the cardboard back on. And I'll show you how I do that. So what I do to get it back in that same spot is I will put that all through there and look underneath there and make sure the awl is going into the hole. Kind of reposition it, and then I'll put a staple right here by it. Do the same thing here. Make sure my awl is into the hole here and here. Yep, that's in there. And then just staple that back on, and then that's pretty much it. That's the end of it, and you end up with a nice brand new box cushion, double welt. Welt on the top, welt on the bottom. That's it. Then these are ready to reattach to the chairs. So that's that. So I'm just gonna show you a quick, or I'm gonna link to a quick tutorial on how I make welt. So that'll be the next video. If you haven't seen that one and you need to know how to make the welt, I'm gonna do that video next. Thanks, you guys.